Today I'm going to be reviewing the Cricut LightPad and demonstrating how you can use this in your own artwork. Hi, I'm Lisa, the artist behind Lachri Fine Art. I was contacted by the people over at Cricut asking if I wanted to review their lightbox, and I'm thinking, it's a lightbox. How different can it be? But they kept telling me, no, we really wanted to improve on how it looks and a lot of the features and make a really nice light pad. So let's go ahead and take a look at what comes in this box, and then I want to talk a little bit about how you can use this in your artwork to improve your own drawing skills. And I will be announcing how you can win one of these light pads for yourself. So opening this up, the color for this one is mint, which is almost an aqua color, so you guys know I'm going to love that. It is so thin, really, really thin, much smaller, much thinner than any other light pad I've used before. It has these rubbery bits on the back, which makes it so that it's not going to slide around like crazy if you're using it on a table. This is small enough that it would be very easy to take with you to an art class or something like that. There is the USB plug, and then that plugs into the wall. And just for transparency, this product was provided to me by Cricut, and they will be providing the unit that will be given away. But all of the opinions and thoughts in this video are my own. I'm not actually being paid otherwise to make this video. Now, I've been teaching painting and drawing for 18 years. And whenever I would have a new student come in and I would explain how I wanted to improve their drawing skills by using a light box, by having them trace things out, the first comment that most people had was, that's cheating. I want to learn to draw it on my own. The thing is, using these tools, when I'm using it to teach somebody to draw, the goal is not to forever trace. The goal is to combine this with freehanding and lots of practice, and you're going to be able to learn to draw more accurately a lot more quickly than freehanding on your own. What happens is, if I have a student draw a rose 12 times, by the 13th time, hopefully they're improving, but a lot of the time they end up just making the same mistake again and again and again. If I now have that student trace that same rose 12 times, that 13th time they'll be able to freehand it nearly perfectly. Why? What's the difference? The biggest factor in learning to paint and draw accurately is learning to see things accurately, and learning to notice things that you didn't notice before. I mean, it can be anything small from, you see a bench, did you notice all of the screws in the bench? Did you notice the way that the wood grain moved? When you first start drawing, you don't notice as much as you do when you've been drawing for a very long time. But one of the ways that you can speed that process along is to trace things. I mean, the human eye, we can use that for an example. If you keep drawing eyes, but you never really notice that eyelashes connect to the outside of the tear line, they shouldn't ever actually touch or look like they're coming out from the eye, straight from the eyeball. Until you notice that, your work is not going to look that accurate. Or how the eyelashes curve and clump. If you trace a few portraits, you're going to start noticing things you never noticed before, and that's what's going to make the biggest difference in your artwork. It's not an issue that you don't have hand-eye coordination. If you can write your name, you've got to have hand-eye coordination to be able to draw. The trick is to teach your brain to see things you didn't otherwise see, whether that be how things are proportionate to each other or just the way that lines, like I was saying with the eyelashes, where they connect on the human face. Those are things that you will start noticing a lot faster if you are combining tracing with practicing freehand. And there will always be artists that just don't enjoy the drawing process. They don't want to learn to draw. I've had plenty of students that way who really just wanted to skip to the fun shading part and working on blending and that sort of thing, or just painting if they like to paint. The funny thing is, what those students didn't always realize is that they were learning to draw just from tracing all of those times. If your drawing skills are already very, very strong, what tracing can do for you is just save time. I mean, the old masters had been using tools like these, different variations of tools, in order to create their work for hundreds of years. This is not something new. It's good enough for the old masters. It is definitely good enough for me. And for me, I just think it's kind of funny. I don't tell people what I freehanded versus what I traced. Funny thing is, no one can tell the difference. If you can already draw, all this is a tool. All it is a time saver for you at that point. And for a professional artist, that alone can be pretty priceless. But it's art. Those who like to throw out, but it's cheating. You can't cheat in art other than stealing someone else's work. And in that case, it's just stealing, not really cheating. So semantics. I don't care what tools an artist uses to create something awesome. All I care about is that end result. And to people who want to judge artists for the tools that they use, some people freak out if you use an eraser. I mean, the things people will find issue with are amazing. And generally, these people just don't understand the concept of art. Creating something awesome is so valuable no matter how you created it. So now that I got that out of the way, one of the things that I liked so much about this particular light box is how thin it is. If you want to practice tracing while you're sitting there watching TV, this is very comfortable in your lap. It's not big and bulky like other light boxes that I've used in the past. It's very, very comfortable to sit and sketch on. If you want to sit and practice your drawing skills while watching TV, this is a great thing to do. Get that portrait that you plan to draw, even if you want to freehand it in the end. Get a photo of that out and practice tracing it a few times. It'll make it so much easier for you when you go to draw it on your own. Or if you just want to work off the thing that you traced, that's okay too. These run $79.99 in the US. These just came out. The 3 places that I've seen them available so far when I looked online was from Cricut's website, from Michael's, and from Joann's. I'm not sure if anywhere else is carrying them yet, but I do know they are available there. If you would like to enter for a chance to win one of these light boxes sent to you by Cricut, not me. I'm really slow at getting giveaways out. I still have one I need to send from January. I'm terrible about that. Cricut will be much more timely than I am. But if you would like to enter, head over to Facebook. I will have this video posted over there. Just leave a comment. That's all you need to do to enter. Now let's go ahead and take a look at the project I created with this light box. First, I printed my photograph on just regular computer paper. Those of you over at Patreon recognize this. This is a photo I took myself that I did a little bit of photoshopping to create that pink area for the flowers and then black and white everywhere else. The next thing that I'm going to do is take the paper that I want to trace this onto and position it exactly where I want it on the paper. So you'll see where I'll slide it around a bit to make sure that I've got that taped right in the right location. I'm going to take 2 pieces of masking tape here. So kind of slide that around, figure out exactly where I want it. I don't want to just tape in the middle because the paper can slide side to side too much. I want to use 2 pieces of tape only on the top because I want to be able to lift it up to see detail that I may not see through the light box. So once I've got that positioned where I want, I tape my work to the paper that I've printed. I'm not taping this to the light box itself. I want to be able to move this around. One of the things that I like so much about this light box, in addition to it just being thin, it also has adjustable brightness. I can make it brighter, make it more dim, depending on what I want. These work best in a dark room. You can have some light on, but a super bright room, you're really not going to see much. So you can see I've got my lights are turned off on this. And I'm going to take a very light pencil. I am using a 6H pencil to sketch everything out. And I do not want to push hard because I don't want those lines to show through, because this one I'm going to work directly on the paper that I'm tracing. But if you're doing something where you're just practicing tracing, then you can use any pencil. Usually you'll want to go with something that's a little bit darker so that you can really see the lines that you've traced out and see where you may want to improve. But here, given that I'm going to use this on artwork, I am using a very, very light pencil and a very light hand. And I can just go through and sketch everything out. This is great if you are struggling, let's say with flowers. You just don't understand how to get those flower petals to bend right. Try tracing it a few times. It's going to show your brain exactly how those move, how those build together, how they clump together. It is so helpful in teaching you those shapes. Just like as kids, we learn to write by tracing over those letters first. And that's really what is happening here. You're teaching your brain to see things accurately, to move that pencil accurately. So once I get that all drawn out, everything sketched where I want, and we'll put the light back on so you can see. Look how light this is. You can barely see it. That's what I want if I am going to be using a tracing in a drawing that I'm going to work on that actual project, not just tracing to practice. I want it to be that light. If I push any harder, those pencil lines are going to show through. So again, look how very, very lightly drawn this is. That's going to make a very big difference so that you don't have heavy pencil lines in your finished artwork. So now we can start the fun part, the shading. So I'm using water-soluble graphite pencils by Faber-Castell on Fabriano Artistico Extra White Hot Press 140-pound watercolor paper. I'm going to use a little bit of my polychromos colored pencils for the flowers themselves. But everything else is first going to be done with this pencil, or these pencils. These pencils range from an HB all the way up to an 8B. So they'll get really, really dark once I add water to them. So I'm starting by shading things out, and the majority of what I'm shading to begin with is being done with my HB for the light areas and my 8B for the dark areas. I'm going to come back with my other pencils a little bit later on, but to start with, that's pretty good. Now these pencils, once you lay them down, when they're dry, they don't erase very well, and they don't really lift if you add more water on top, which is nice. You can layer and layer until you get it to look how you want it to. Where watercolor pencils will typically, the previous layers will lift up more, that really doesn't happen with these. Another thing that I really liked about these pencils is that when you add the water, they blend really smooth. You don't end up with a grainy, gritty look at all. Using a water brush there. That one is by Derwent. And it's just got water in the barrel. I can squeeze a little bit of the barrel. By squeezing the barrel, that will allow more water to come through on those bristles. The paintbrush that you're seeing me use, when I go back to that, I've just dipped the tip of that in water. And I played with both, going back and forth, trying to figure out, do I like the water brush better, or do I like using a paintbrush and water better? I actually like them both. I think if you're traveling, if you wanted to go paint in a park or something like that, or draw in a park, then I would definitely go with the water brushes. But at home, I kind of like them both. I was just, depending on which one I grabbed first, I was pretty happy either way. Sorry about the lines going through the video. That will stop as soon as I've got a bit more shading. My camera hates straight white paper. And I'm starting with the darkest areas first. So for this one, that is going to be all of the stems and leaves. And it makes it, by starting with the dark area, this is going to make it much easier for me to judge my values through the rest of the piece. One of the biggest problems that people have when they're struggling to make things look more realistic, it's getting your values correct. Get your darks dark enough and your lights light enough. That will make something look far, far more realistic. You can have the drawing absolutely perfect, but if you don't get those values in there right, it's not going to look realistic. You really want to look at these more in the terms of abstract shapes. I'm not looking at this going, okay, I'm drawing a leaf, I'm drawing a flower, I'm drawing a stem. I'm not even remotely considering what it is I'm drawing at that point. What I'm doing is I've got my reference photo blown up on a computer monitor next to me, and I'm just focusing on one little shape at a time and trying to copy that as close as possible. I don't need it to be super, super accurate. When you're working on flowers, this is one of the things that I like so much about starting students off with flowers or roses. Anything, well, I guess roses are flowers, a little redundant there, but anything like that, because if you're a little off, if a petal's not exact, if a leaf isn't exactly right, no one's going to look at that and go, oh, that's pretty messed up. Whereas if you were drawing a portrait and the nose is a little too far to the left, that people are going to notice. So when you're first starting off, I think flowers are much, much more forgiving and can be very encouraging because your finished product looks beautiful. I mean, it looks like a flower, even if petals are completely missing. You miss ears on a portrait, people will notice. And look at how you can really see my pencil strokes here. I'm not using techniques that I would typically use with graphite. With graphite, I want to keep my pencils very, very sharp and work in little circles and start with my lighter pencils and build up. And there's a whole process. Here with these water-soluble graphites, I don't need to really do any of that. Once I go over it with the water, it's going to blend everything out perfectly. It's going to dissolve into the tooth of the paper really nicely. One of the things that was really nice about combining the water-soluble graphite with colored pencil is the colored pencil sticks very, very well on top. And with the water-soluble graphite, it doesn't dissolve with odorless mineral spirits. So when I went later on with odorless mineral spirits on top of some of this, it didn't affect the graphite at all. The odorless mineral spirits really doesn't do much to graphite. I mean, it's the same as trying to use water to blend colored pencils. It doesn't do much. That's not what they're meant for. Blending some of this out, and I went a lot lighter on my background, especially the upper left hand corner of this, than what I had in my reference photo. For these lines, I just took a piece of paper and used the edge there for the areas I wanted to be a little bit more straight. Most of these lines I don't want perfectly straight. Even these I don't want them perfectly straight, just semi. So I used the edge of the paper, but when I get into the wood grain, I really don't want these perfectly straight. And this is a good thing to practice tracing too. If you're having trouble getting wood grain to look realistic, to get the perspective right, that sort of thing, try tracing it a few times. It'll make it so much easier for you when you go to freehand it, because now your brain sees how that moved. It understands the movement there in that grain. Trying to decide which edge I wanted this line to be. And then I'm shading that. When I go over with the paintbrush, I'm not going to be really careful trying to make that line straight, because I want this wood to feel very old, very bumpy and aged. This is actually from my dinner table, is made from reclaimed wood. I get splinters from that thing all the time. It's beautiful. You just have to be careful not to run your hand along the side. But the wood is very, very aged, very old. It looks really, really interesting, and I want to create that here, so I don't want these lines to be too perfect. So I'm using a tack-on bristled filbert brush here to blend these larger areas, and I'm going to let that dry completely, and then I can go over with my next layer. You'll see me brush this over a little bit where the stems were. It really didn't affect it at all. They were already dry, so it didn't smudge anything out. Moving that pencil side to side to create that wood grain. Another thing you can do if you like painting and drawing wood grain, go to the hardware store and just get yourself a couple of pieces of wood. They'll cut it down for you to a smaller size, but that way you can really see the knots in that wood. Get yourself an interesting piece and use that as a reference when you are painting and drawing something like this, just so you can really see firsthand how that wood looks. I used to keep a piece by my easel all the time. It made it so much easier for me when I would draw something, because sometimes you'll draw something where you're like, okay, I know it needs to be wood grain, but I don't have a good reference photo. Having that piece of wood next to my easel all the time, it was just the handiest reference. I could just look over and see how that should move if my piece wasn't going quite right. Going to go ahead and darken this up. Look how dark this will go. This is one of my favorite things with the water-soluble graphite. Not only is it so fast to work in, it goes really, really dark. Oh, there went my lights. It goes really, really dark. So it makes it easy to get that very, very high contrast. I'm going to be doing a piece sometime in the near future where the entire thing is underpainted in black and white like this with the water-soluble graphite, and then I'm going to go over the whole thing with colored pencil. I want to see how that works, because you guys have seen me do this with oils and acrylics, where I'll do a black and white underpainting and then glaze color over. I want to see how that works as an entire piece with colored pencil. I tried it here. This was my first test once I got onto the pink flowers. Really wasn't sure how that was going to work, if the gray showed too much, if it was going to be helpful at all. This seemed to be a really fun way to go and a huge time saver, because once I got to the colored pencil part, I had done so much work already with shading with the pencils, which were much faster than colored pencil, that once I went through with the colored pencil, I was basically just tinting the color, doing the same thing with glazing that I would with painting. So I'm kind of excited to see in a future kind of a bigger piece, more detailed, how that works as a whole, with the entire thing being done underneath with water-soluble graphite and then colored pencil over everything. So that will be in the very, very near future. So here I'm starting to shade these flower petals. My initial shading, I'm not worried about having my values perfect, having my edges super clean. I'm just starting to block in the shape of the petals. And a few of these aren't exact to my reference photo. Doesn't really matter. There were a few times where I thought, I don't really like how this is bending. It looks kind of weird. It's drawing attention to a weird area. I'm going to change this petal. You can do that. Your reference photo is really just a guideline, especially when you're doing something like this with nature, something that has a very natural feel. You have some freedom to change things as needed to make your piece look better. Now, when you get into doing portraits, there's certain things that you've got to be more exact on, and you don't have as much freedom with moving stuff around. But with flower petals or anything with leaves, if it looks better to change a leaf, leave it out. Do whatever your piece needs to make it better. Don't feel like you always have to copy every single thing on that reference photo exactly. Adding some shadows under these. And again, throughout all of this, I'm always letting it dry in between blending with water. Once I blend things with water, if I try to go over it with the pencil, it doesn't really stick. It doesn't work very well, and it damages the tooth of the paper, which isn't super helpful. Now, I wasn't sure how dark I could go with the graphite and still have the colored pencil show up well over this, so I was being a little bit reserved here. I think I could have gone quite a bit darker and still gotten a good result. So when I try this again, I'm going to play around with that to see what kind of results I get. Now, once I have the basic shading in, this is where I come through and start defining the petals better. So you saw the first layers. It was like, yeah, I can tell it's a flower, but I can't really tell one petal from the next. That's what I'm working on here now. I want to clean up my edges and make sure everything's nice and crisp. Now that flat flower petal in the back, or flower, the whole flower in the very back, that one blends in too much with my background because I decided to let the back end of the table be as light as it was. The flower itself doesn't stand out well. So if I were to leave this all black and white, I would need to darken that up a lot. This just doesn't work with the lighting that I have here. But once I go over it, because I knew I was going to go over it with the color, I'm going to let the color be the thing that creates that contrast. So it's not just my values at that point, it's the actual contrasting color with the pinks. Blending that out a bit with that water brush again. The water brush that I'm using here, this is a round number 2. And again, that one is by Derwent. I'll have links to all of the supplies that I'm using for this project below in the video description. Coming back through, defining things a bit better. Now, if you are going to combine a water-soluble product like this, or even if you were using Inktense or Graphite, if you're going to combine that with colored pencil, get that part done first, because you don't want to put the water-soluble pencils on top of your wax and oil-based colored pencils. Make sure you do that in the right order. It's kind of like with painting with acrylics and oil paints. You can mix the two, but you want to do everything in acrylic first and then put oil paint on top. And so that's what I'm doing here. All the water-soluble product first, then the colored pencil. So now I'm coming through and look how it just tints the color. I'm not having to do a lot of work here. I thought I was going to end up spending hours to tint the colors of, or to fill in these flower petals, and it really only took a few minutes. It went so fast. So that's why I'm really excited to try this on a future full project, because I want to see how much time that really does save. I'm not pushing too hard because I am going to come back through and use some darker pencils, and I want to make sure I leave enough of the tooth of the paper for that to the next color to stand up and show up against. I'm just going to fill all of these in first with this pale pink. I guess it's more of a medium pink. If I wasn't lazy, I'd go look up the actual name of that pencil for you. But this is the Polychromos, so it's going to be a bit more translucent than my other pencils, which I wanted. I wanted some of that gray to show through. I really wanted this very muted color to pop on this one. I don't want it to be super, super bright, bright pink. I want it to sort of fade and blend and mix with the graphite, the gray areas. I'm mostly moving the pencil in little circles and ovals so that I do have a smooth finish. There is with the odorless mineral spirits. I'm using Mona Lisa odorless mineral spirits. You can also use Gamsol. It works exactly the same. It's supposed to be a little bit less toxic, but costs a bit more. I just use the Mona Lisa odorless mineral spirits because I have so much of it here, being that that's what I use for oil painting. So it's just convenient to use the one. Now I'm coming on top of that with my darker pencil. I let that dry completely. I'm going to do a little bit more shading here. And what that odorless mineral spirit did is it dissolved that pencil a bit, so I didn't have that grainy, gritty look. I wasn't having the dots of the white of the paper underneath showing through, which I wouldn't have had a lot anyway because I did have the graphite. Now that I've got the pink, look how that flower in the back, it really stands out against that background. Once I get all of this filled in, I did use my Derwent Drawing Chinese White a little bit for some of the highlights, but for the majority of that, I am going to get my white highlights on top of everything, both the graphite and the colored pencil, by using my Brush and pencil, you can get this from brushandpencil.com, or I'll have links to everywhere. You can get it in the video description. But I used my Touch Up Texture and titanium white powder, mixed that together, and then used a #1 liner brush and got my white highlights on there, because my white pencils are just not quite opaque enough. So this really stands out. A lot of people ask, why don't you just use acrylic paint, or why don't you use a gel pen? Those aren't archival with colored pencil. Those are not intended to be used with colored pencil, so they have a tendency to smudge or flake off, where this won't when it's dry. This is meant for colored pencil, so it's going to give you archival results. And I like the results better anyway. These little white highlights, these final details, really make a big difference in separating one flower petal from the next. And it makes the overall piece much more interesting to look at. And I did a little bit of highlighting on the stems and flowers, or the leaves, words, they're so hard. I did a little bit of highlighting there as well. It stuck just fine over the graphite. I wasn't sure if it was going to look a little bit weird, like they were obviously two different mediums, but it blended in seamlessly. It wasn't something where you looked at and thought, oh, you used another product, it was shinier or anything like that. It really worked well over that water-soluble graphite. So I was pretty happy about that. I wasn't sure how that was going to come out. Some more little highlights in there. I'm going to do some dots on the center of the flower. I wanted this to have a quicker, more almost a sketchy feel. I wasn't going for super, super realistic. And mixing these two together really worked well for that. And there is my finished piece. And just a final thought, no matter what tools you use in your work, no matter what style you like to draw, you're always going to have someone tell you that it's wrong, that their way of doing things is the right way. And the majority of people, actually every single person I've ever known of who came and said, no, you can't learn from tracing, or tracing isn't a valid method to create art, it was always from people who didn't have experience teaching tracing this way. They didn't have experience seeing how much good it could do for students. They just made the assumption, that's not how I learned, so that's not the way to learn. Anything with art, you're going to have different people learn different ways. And I can tell you firsthand, 18 years of teaching painting and drawing, this method worked wonderfully for my students. I saw such improvement once I would have students start combining tracing with freehanding and lots of practice. So don't let someone discourage you from trying a different way of learning. If one way isn't working for you, try different methods, try different tools until you find the thing that is the right fit for you. My shoulder chicken wants to know if you guys are excited about the new season of Game of Thrones as he is. Have you subscribed yet? If not, I have a handy button right there. It's round, has an orange arrow going to it. If you click on that, that'll help you to keep up to date with all of my new art videos.